finally, we move on to pitching, and there's a lot to talk about. In fact, we're going to spend the next 2 weeks talking about just this position. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, November 19th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, we are doing starting pitcher recap, taking a look at some league-wide stats and the top 24 finishers from this past season. And we did get some big news regarding Ballpark. So we found out where the Rays are going to play, George Steinbrenner Field, and the Orioles apparently admitted to an overcorrection. Now they're going to have a happy medium. So the wall is coming back in and left field. We'll talk about how both of those things affect fantasy baseball in 2025. Let's just begin with some of those macro starting pitcher trends and stats from this past season, and starting with innings. So as we know, the workhorse has really kind of faded away over the past decade in fantasy and real baseball. But this year we had 4 pitchers with 200 plus innings. In 2023, we had 5. In 2022, we had 8. So again, you see that downward trend. And if we lower that threshold to just 180 innings, we had 21 this past season, 25 last year, and 27 in 2022. So Scott, not all that surprising, but I guess some statistics to back up the fact that we don't have individual pitchers who are throwing as many innings anymore in fantasy.
Yeah, it's been a long-term trend, and it seems to be increasing. My personal feeling, just going through the 2024 season, is that most teams effectively had a 6-man rotation for stretches. Like they never, few actually said, "Oh, we have a 6-man rotation," but they would just insert spot starters so often whenever they had a stretch without an off day. That it oftentimes kind of toppled the 2-start pitcher rankings, because I'd look ahead to the next week. I'd see how everybody lines up. Okay, this team has 7 games. We got a guy going Monday and also Tuesday. They'll both be 2-star pitchers for the upcoming week. But then only the Monday guy would be, because a 6th starter would get inserted at the last minute. And that happened often enough that I feel like that's probably a big contributor to this trend, and I'm not sure anything's going to reverse that trend. So as we'll get into over the next 2 weeks, starting pitcher feels insanely deep, like as deep as I've ever seen it. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. Deep with like actual quality pitchers. But because the starting pitcher usage is changing, like you probably want more of a surplus there.
Well, and those things probably go hand in hand, right? Like like I'm looking at, you said there were 21 pitchers who threw 180 innings last season?
Yes, this past season, 21.
2015, so 10 years ago, 28 pitchers threw 200 innings.
Wow. We had
that's
4.
Decade, that's only a
year.
decade ago.
Yeah.
There were 4 this year, which is the lowest number in a non-strike shortened season outside of 2021, when everybody was coming back from the COVID year. So that right there tells you this, like 28 200 inning pitchers in 2015. That's wild. And so in 2015, if Paul Skenes threw a sub-2 ERA in 130 innings, that was probably a top 10 season. But now it was the number 4 or 5 starting pitcher? Like it's just a total sea change that has made it's, I think, to a certain extent, elevated the handful of guys who can really throw 200 innings. I mean, handful. I don't know if 4 is even a handful at this point.
As opposed to did.
Well, yeah, I guess more than 4 can, but
yeah.
Chris Bassett was terrible this year, so he was never going to get to 200 innings. He did it 2 years ago. But I almost feel like, I know Zack Wheeler on a per inning basis falls short of some of his contemporaries, but you legitimately might project him for 25, 30 more innings than anyone in that same range at starting pitcher, right? Like Tarik Skubal, Paul Skenes. I mean,
it's
might project him for 40 more innings than Paul Skenes in 2025.
It's
And
tricky.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I kind of lost the thread on starting pitcher for a stretch. We're talking a few years back where I really emphasized workload to the point that I maybe de-emphasized skill level too much. And you can only predict workload so much, right?
Sure.
Like Zack Wheeler has one IL stint.
Everybody can get hurt. Every pitcher
Right.
is an injury risk.
Right. So Zack Wheeler is really good. He's been Cy Young caliber for a few years in a row now. And I think that is why, for instance, I have Zack Wheeler second behind just Tarik Skubal. I know some people are going to want to put Paul Skenes ahead of him. I'm going to put Wheeler second. And part of there is the workload disparity factoring into that sum. But like Zack Wheeler, Cy Young caliber himself, like part of it is just the provenness factor that Wheeler brings to the tables.
But
Just one table.
That inning thing, I happen to be flipping through. I have the Bill James historical abstract on my bookshelf, and I happen to be flipping through it today, and he had a prediction. It was written in like 2004 or something, and he had a prediction that the trend of pitchers not throwing deeper into games and not throwing as many complete games, just not throwing as many innings. His prediction was in the 21st century, that trend would reverse. And I'm not here to pick on Bill James. That was just one prediction from a 1,200 page book. That was incorrect. And what we've seen is a steady decline up to 2020. 2020, obviously nobody throws, but every single year in baseball history, you had at least 13 pitchers throw 200 innings before 2020. It hasn't happened more than 8 times in the last 4 seasons. I'm not going to say never. It seems unlikely we'll see 10 pitchers throw 200 innings in the same season again.
Yeah, ever again, unless they change the rules, which something talked about, like requiring pitchers to go 6 innings or throw something like that. It's not here yet, but it's something that's kind of being bandied about right now, and that's kind of just in conjunction with the trend of the game, right? You mentioned Chris, since the COVID shortened season. I mean, since then, it's pitchers are throwing harder than ever before. It feels like we're seeing more injuries than ever before as a result of that. We think as a result of that, and teams just trying different things, right? Like the advent of the opener, right? Like that's kind of changed the game as well. So all of those things in conjunction have kind of led to this decline in innings. I don't know if there was like a final point that you were going to mention there, Chris.
No, it's just like, I think like Sandy Alcantara coming back next year. I know coming back from injury, if he threw 200 innings next year, it wouldn't surprise me. He's capable of it. I'm not saying I expect it, but it's one of those things where if you've shown the skill, I think you can do it. And that's where it comes to like the Zack Wheeler versus Paul Skenes question. I'm sure we'll get into that more, but it's like, it's not that Paul Skenes can't do it. And it's not that Paul Skenes can't be effective while throwing 180 innings. We've just never seen that. And I personally do put a premium on the pitchers that we have seen go that deep into a season and maintain their effectiveness. Because what wouldn't surprise me is if we got Paul Skenes, at 170 innings next season, and then he just kind of falls apart. Not gets hurt. I'm not predicting that, but just like, we don't know. It's uncharted territory, I guess.
Until I've seen a pitcher do it, I don't necessarily trust him to do it, is the stance I've held for a while now. Just on a quick point on Sandy Alcantara. If he went 200 innings, that would be the record for a pitcher coming back from Tommy John, which is currently owned by Matt Harvey, who had 189. Justin Verlander, an old guy coming back from Tommy John surgery, won the Cy Young that year, but still only 175. Right? Yeah. So
it would be surprising.
Yeah. It would be reckless on the Marlins.
Yeah, he didn't pitch in a game last year. That's a fair point.
Yeah, other league-wide trends that I just wanted to mention, league-wide starting pitcher stats. So not all pitching stats. This is just limited to starting pitcher stats. Part of the reason why Scott says this position is so deep is if you just look at these league-wide stats. This past season, 4.15 ERA, 127 whip. In 2023, that was a 4.45 ERA and a 131 whip. And then in 2022, it was a 4.05 ERA and 126 whip. So this past season and 2022 look much more similar. And 2023 looks like the outlier when, whether you think there was a bouncy ball or whatever it was, it seems like the offensive environment was up overall in 2023. And I think if we're just projecting forward based on the last 3 years, we have to look at 2022 and 2024 as that kind of feels like where the pitching environment is going to be, though we can never know for sure.
10% of the league, as we will get to very shortly, does appear to be pitching in much more favorable offensive environments than they were last season. I think at least 2 of them are significantly better hitting environments, and one will probably be at least slightly better hitting environment.
All right,
more on that later in the show.
Look at this guy, professional broadcaster, a tease there from CPT. Let's take our first break. When we return, we'll get into the top 24 from this past season, and we'll do that right after this.
Historic rivals with unforgettable seasons meet in a game of honor. The Army-Navy game presented by USAA, December 14th on CBS.
Welcome back in. Let's recap the top 24 starting pitchers from this past season, and this is using something I haven't used before, but I've heard other people in the industry kind of reference it, so let's try it out and see how accurate it was, I guess. The Fangraphs Player Rater for 12-team Roto 5x5 leagues, and we'll go 2 at a time, keep things moving. I will mention where they finished in head-to-head points leagues on CBS as well, just to kind of show both sides some love, the Roto, the points leagues players. But the top 2 pitchers this past season, Tarik Skubal and Zack Wheeler, numbers 1 and 2. They were both top 2 in head-to-head points leagues as well. Skubal, the likely AL Cy Young Award winner. He can do it all. He gets whiffs, ground balls. He limits walks, limits hard contact. He throws hard. He has 4 different pitches. He has the arsenal. The only question you might have is the workload. He jumped up so much, 95 total innings in 2023. That was all the way up to 211 total innings this past season, if you include the postseason. How will his arm handle that? Big jump from one year to the next. I think that's probably the biggest question for Skubal. And then Zack Wheeler, he's as consistent as they come. He's a workhorse. Skills are still intact. The only question here, Scott, is that he turns 35 in May. So, is it one of those things where it could just kind of start to decline out of nowhere at that age? It might. We haven't seen it yet, but it might. So what are your thoughts here on Skubal and Zack Wheeler?
Yeah, those are my 1 and 2 for next year. I'll start with that. The concerns are exactly the ones you bring up. The innings increase for Skubal, 85 to 211. That's a big jump. But he continued to dominate even as he piled up those innings. Now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a serious arm injury awaiting him, but I don't think we're especially good at predicting that. And in terms of the numbers he put up, everything in the profile suggests it's legit and that he can do it again. And so I think he's now shown he can take on a big workload, and he's done so with percentages as good as you could ask for from a starting pitcher. So I think Skubal's a pretty easy choice for number 1. I'm probably not going to draft him where I need to draft him, but he deserves to be the first one off the board. And as for Wheeler, mid-30s, a guy who's taken on a big workload routinely, he's shown he can handle that. That feels like an indication of how safe he is to me, rather than how much risk there is there. Now, yeah, it could all end at age 36, but with pitchers compared to hitters, it could all end for anybody at any age. It's just not the sort of thing that you can apply unless you see evidence of a decline, like, oh, he's becoming less dominant or something. Maybe he's losing it a little bit, like Justin Verlander coming back from the Tommy John surgery. He wasn't, even though he had
won the Cy Young, but
won the Cy Young, sub-2 ERA. He wasn't as overpowering, and that's gotten worse with each subsequent year. He was in his late 30s at his time, not his mid-30s. But again, it could happen at any time. We haven't seen any evidence from that from Wheeler yet. In fact, this past year was only the second time he had ever struck out more than 10 batters per 9. So he feels as safe as starting pitchers get for me. And I phrase it that way purposely because, of course, starting pitchers are inherently unsafe.
And one thing I do think Wheeler kind of has going for him, and this might sound like a backhanded compliment, but he doesn't have like one put away pitch that he relies on the way a lot of pitchers do, where it's like, oh, if that pitch goes away, it's going to be a problem. For Zack Wheeler, it's like his four seamer's 30% whiff rate, his sweeper's 34, his curveball's 39.
I would argue that his fastball is that put away pitch, but the velocity is still there. It's like everything is fine.
He brought in a splitter this year for the first time, and it was awesome. He kind of stopped using it in the second half. I'm not sure why, but it was for the 7% usage it averaged out to on the year. It was his best swing and miss pitch.
And so I look at that and I think like multiple things would have to go wrong for Zack Wheeler to not be good in a way that I don't think is true of every pitcher. I do think it's like Tarik Skubal is similar. He's just got a whole mess of put away pitches. Paul Skenes is kind of the same way, where like Skenes actually, like, you look at the individual pitch whiff rates and it's like, it's all just good, but nothing's great. The key is that like you cannot sit on any pitch in any count. And that's where Zack Wheeler is. And it's kind of weird if you've just been playing fantasy baseball and listened to our podcast for like 4 or 5 years, all you know is a world where Zack Wheeler throws 180 innings. This is a new thing for like Zack Wheeler was not the preeminent workhorse in Major League Baseball until his 30s. Really, it's a weird late career thing for Zack Wheeler. And like Scott said, if I haven't seen any signs of decline, I'm not going to price it in at this point. The proven ability to throw this many innings is an asset, not a liability for me. I know not everybody views it that way, but that's how I view it.
The numbers 3 and 4 starting pitchers were Chris Sale and Paul Skenes. Sale was also third in total head-to-head points. Skenes was the SP4 in head-to-head points per game because obviously he didn't make enough, starts to actually, factor in total points. But if you just look at on a per start basis, Paul Skenes was the 4th best pitcher in that format. Sale, huge bounce back season, the likely NL Cy Young Award winner. Velocity jumped back up. Slider was awesome as always. But he did miss a few starts towards the end of the season with back spasms. You hope that's all it was because obviously he does have an extensive injury history. And then Skenes just won the NL Rookie of the Year award. We're recording this on Monday night. He was just given the award on Monday night, and he was ridiculous. He was the first rookie pitcher with an ERA under 2 and 170 plus strikeouts since at least 1913. And you have to pay the price to get him. The early ADP is 11.2. as the SP1 off the board. So, Chris, any concerns with the way Sale ended the year with that injury? And what about Skenes as the potential SP1 moving forward?
I'm not going to draft Paul Skenes in 2025. He's just going to be on 0 of my teams because
it sounds like it hurts you.
Well, like I would love to have Paul Skenes. I think there's a decent chance he's the best pitcher in baseball already, but you have to draft him as if he's not just the best pitcher in baseball, but like by far the best pitcher in baseball. And I think this might be a situation where like, if you look at whenever Fantasy Pros publishes their consensus rankings for 2025, if they haven't already, he will, I would guess, will not be the number 1 pitcher in the consensus rankings. It's just there will be one person in every draft, whether it's 4th overall, as in a draft that Frank did recently, 5th in a draft that I did. Someone is going to take Paul Skenes in the 1st round in every draft. And I don't think that will be the consensus, but that's where his ADP will be. And look, God bless. Like I'm not going to make the case against Paul Skenes, except that I don't think he is so far ahead of Tarik Skubal as a pitcher right now that I can justify taking him a half a round, a full round ahead of where Skubal's going when he's never thrown more than 130 innings at a major league level, has never thrown more than 160 innings in a season. Like, it's just, maybe he is 5% better than Tarik Skubal on a per inning basis. Skubal has thrown 190 innings at the major league level at a SP1 best pitcher in baseball type of level. And so the amount of confidence I have to have that Paul Skenes is better, given that innings gap, I just can't get there. Because, like, remember, Tarik Skubal in 2023 threw 80 innings at the major league level, where he was on a per inning basis the absolute best pitcher in baseball by every metric you could possibly. Like, he was better than relievers who threw 65 innings, and he took a little step back on a per inning basis, because that's what you should expect when the workload ramps up. And I think Paul Skenes is incredible. I don't want to make the case against him. I just cannot get there.
Well, let's reframe it then, because I do think Skubal, Tarik Skubal is going to be the consensus number one ranked. And I do think, only draft results we're seeing now are from like Sharks and stuff, right? Like, we're not seeing the normie drafts yet. And I think once the normie drafts begin, we will see Skubal taken ahead of Skenes on average. So let's say Skubal goes off the board with the 8th or 9th pick overall, something like that. Would you be comfortable taking Skenes right after? Because for me, it's not. I don't even know that I want to spend around 2 pick on him.
I'd still rather build a pitching staff around Zack Wheeler.
Yeah,
I have Skenes. I think he was 4th when I did my SP rankings. It's a little, we're about a month and a half removed from that, so I don't know if I had Skenes 3rd or 4th. But I would feel okay with him at 3rd. But I don't think I could click him ahead of. Yeah, I had him 3rd. I couldn't click him ahead of Wheeler, who, again, maybe not quite as dominant. Maybe doesn't have that 12K per 9 upside, but
yeah, no, I'm with you.
Has thrown the 200 plus innings before that Skenes has never come close to.
Skenes doesn't meet that standard I mentioned before, where unless I've seen you take on that workload, I don't necessarily trust you to do that. Maybe he will, but I don't know that I want to stake my season on it, especially given the distribution of talent at starting pitcher this year. The way I lay it out, clear top 3, whatever order you want to put him in. It's a clear top 3: Skubal, Wheeler, Skenes for me.
Yeah, I agree.
And then Sale is number 4 by default, just because
I have Burns 4th, actually.
Yeah, that's fine. There's no obvious number 4, I feel like. And so Sale, okay, he just won the NL pitching triple crown. I'm going to default to him there. But it's not like I have a ton of confidence in him doing it again. He managed to have a healthy season for the first time in 5 years, and it wasn't even totally healthy because he had that back issue in the end that cost him velocity. So
yeah, that's one of those things that, like, what if that back injury happens in June? We don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a good point. But what I'm building up to is that even though there's a clear top 3 at the starting pitcher, I know they're all going to be gone within the first 16 to 24 picks. I don't want to invest in a starting pitcher then. So
I'm not taking a starting pitcher until those. We've talked a lot about like that first 15 hitters. I'm not taking a starting pitcher until they're off the board.
I don't think they give you a clear enough advantage relative, even though they're the obvious top 3. I don't think they give you a clear enough advantage relative to the hitters, because there's so many good pitchers still to come. Not as good, but good enough that you could get multiple of them to make up for the first or second round guy.
So, Scott, you mentioned Chris Sale is going to be your SP4 heading into next year. Chris, you mentioned it was going to be Corbin Burns. I think my SP4 might be this next name we're going to talk about, and it's Logan Gilbert. The number 5 and 6 starting pitchers this year were Logan Gilbert and Shota Imanaga. Gilbert was the SP4 in head-to-head points. Imanaga was SP7 in that format. When diving into Gilbert, I really just loved everything that I saw. I mean, he is a workhorse. He was first among qualified starting pitchers in swinging strike rate. Fastball velocity.
That's shocking, actually.
That's crazy, right? I did not realize that. Fastball velocity was up, and he ranked very highly in the Stuff Plus metric, much higher than he's ever been before. I mean, the biggest drawback for him is that he had 9 wins, but that's out of his control. He pitches in a favorable ballpark on what should be a good team. So, man, everything I looked into looked great for Logan Gilbert. And then Imanaga had an incredible rookie season, 291 ERA, 102 whip, just over a strikeout per inning. He has that riding fastball. He has a wipeout splitter, but he's really just a two-pitch pitcher. The underlying ERA indicator said, okay, maybe there's some regression coming. So you have some questions there for Imanaga. Scott, your thoughts here on Logan Gilbert and Shota Imanaga?
Yeah, so that stat didn't stand out to me. Logan Gilbert being first in swinging strike rate among qualifiers. If you drop the qualification to 100 innings, Blake Snell and Garrett Crochet are ahead of him by a big margin, but Gilbert still comes in third. I find that interesting because if we're just talking about K per 9.5, that doesn't blow me away. Logan Gilbert threw enough innings that he still got to 220 strikeouts, which is, of course, a great number. But that was a league leading number of innings. Great control pitcher, a little prone to home runs, so it's a good thing he pitches in Seattle. I don't see why he wouldn't continue pitching in Seattle. So I think he's a pretty safe choice. He still feels a little he feels a little unspectacular to me. Like, I could see his ERA, it was 3.73 in 2023 and dropped to 3.23. I could see it creeping into the mid threes again.
Yeah. That'll
make the premium you pay for him a little less palatable.
I guess my pushback, just real quick on Gilbert there, is that was the year where offense was up, right? If we do assume that the offensive environment will be like it was this year in 2022, he had a 3.20 and a 3.23 ERA in those two seasons. So I guess
I don't know how I can assume anything about offensive environment.
That's fair.
Which I know you could say, my take about how deep starting pitcher is, it could be upended by the environment changing again. But when I say pitching is deep, I mean like from a true talent perspective, not just from, okay, these guys happen to put up good numbers during this pitching favorable season. But that's a separate point. Logan Gilbert, I have him sixth. So I think that's about as low as you could justify ranking him sixth. Mm-hmm. So maybe a clear 1, 2, 3, and then a clear 4, 5, 6 in some order between Sale, Burns, and Gilbert. It's just that Gilbert's the last of those three for me.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm just looking through like Logan Gilbert's history, and I don't know when the last time he missed a start due to injury.
He's a workhorse, man.
But it has to be college, because you look at the number of games started, you go to his college, we don't like, that's just a completely different schedule. But his first year as a professional, 26 starts, 135 innings across 3 levels. 2020, he didn't make any starts. Yeah, that'll happen. There was a thing happening. 2021, 25 starts. There were no MLB missed starts. Then 32, 32, 33. So like, that is about as clean a track record for health as you can possibly have. Like, I think of other pitchers, and like Corbin Burns, I think missed a little time in 2020 at the end of the year with like a back injury. And that was the only one that I've been able to find for him. But like, it's pretty rare. I think it goes without saying to find a pitcher with that pristine of a track record. And Imanaga is someone who did miss some time. I think his final 2 years in Japan with, I'm not sure what the injury specifically was, but I think his innings were a little lower. No.
Yeah, he was at 159 in 2020.
Yeah, no, I don't think he missed any starts.
But I think that's just how much they pitch.
Yeah, they pitch every 6 day, and they only have like 145 game schedule. So I think that's actually his track record's pretty pristine as well. Maybe I think of Kodai Senga, who missed some time.
I mean, for as dominant as Imanaga is, he doesn't throw very hard, and that's why we were getting some. The scouting reports were kind of mixed on him coming over from Japan last year, because he didn't have that traditional dominant arsenal. He does throw a lot of splitters, which is in theory not so good for the elbow. But I think he's pretty durable. But they do space out his starts, and that will keep the innings total down for Imanaga. I'm not counting on much regression for Imanaga at this point. I don't know if I'm totally changing the subject by talking about another pitcher here. But it was one of the two from this group. So I'm not counting on a big correction for Imanaga. We were expecting it over the course of this year. And I think if once seeing that his fly ball heavy arsenal could survive the summer like it did this year, I'm not saying he'll have a 291 ERA again, but I'm not worried about like a 361 ERA so much. I think he'll be, I think if you look at Imanaga and George Kirby, you compare the underlying stats, they come out looking pretty similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I do want to point out is you said he only throws 2 pitches, and that's he threw his 4-seamer and his splitter 83% of the time, basically. And that's basically a 2-pitch pitcher, right? The one thing that I do wonder is while he primarily threw 2 pitches, he actually threw 7 at various points throughout the season. He had a sweeper, a cutter, a changeup, a curveball, and a sinker that he would mix in. And you could say the changeup and splitter, there's not much difference between them. Sinker and fastball, 4-seamer, kind of the same. But like, I do wonder if just hitters having knowledge that there are 7 pitches he could throw makes the fact that he throws the 2 as often as he does less of a concern, because it's not just like it's not just that he throws the 2 hit pitches, but that hitters have to game plan. What if he throws the curveball in this count? What if he throws the sweeper in this count? And like the chances of that are pretty unlikely, and they might just be show me pitches. Although actually pretty much all the curveball, the sinker, the splitter, and the sweeper and changeup all rated out really well.
Yeah.
And so it's one where I wonder if, like, even though he only throws his changeup and his curveball 3-4% of the time, it might just be enough that they exist. That hitters can't just sit 4-seamer splitter, especially when he locates the 4-seamer up so well and is one of the few pitchers who legitimately can throw a splitter 31% of the time because he commands it really well. That's, Nick Pollock famously hates splitters. He thinks no pitcher should ever throw a splitter. And it's because splitters are very hard to command. I don't agree. I think he goes too far, but I get the theory. But in Imanaga's case, the fact that he can command that splitter and throw it just at the bottom of the zone as consistently as he can, even if you know they're coming, if the splitter and fastball look the same out of the hand, how do you barrel those 2 pitches up? And then knowing he's got a sweeper and a chain and other pitches with slightly different movement profiles.
And you brought this up coming into the season, is that we don't often see this archetype from a left-handed pitcher too. It's very rare. We talk about like the Joe Ryans and the Bailey Obers, these guys that like throw this kind of deceptive fastball at the top of the zone. They don't really throw all that hard, and they get the most out of their skill set. We don't really see that from the left-hand side. And then you throw the splitter on top of it, which just makes Imanaga a really unique case. So
lefty splitters are incredibly rare. They're one of the most rare pitch types. And I think you can look at that both ways. You can say, well, hitters never see this type of pitcher. Or you can say, well, they just saw it for a full season. What happens if they're more used to it? We don't know. I'm not ranking Imanaga as if he's going to repeat 2024.
Where do you have him ranked?
I think it was around 15.
I think a solid SP2 outcome. Like, I would expect some ERA to regression, but he's a really good command pitcher. I don't think he's going to walk in any. He'll probably give up lots of solo homers. The whip should still be really good. Like a mid-3s ERA, strikeout per inning, 110 whip. That's probably like an SP2.
I will say too. I could see both Imanaga and Gilbert having some Aaronola in them, where they're good pitchers. I expect them to be good. I could see the ERA being on the higher side for both of them.
I don't think they just crazy either.
They don't. I guess it's kind of dumb to say Logan Gilbert doesn't miss bats at an elite level when he just literally led the majors in swinging strike rate. He doesn't strike batters out. So he strikes batters out at a slightly above average clip, but he does rely on his defense more than Tarik, Skubal, and Paul Skenes, certainly, but also Zack Wheeler and other pitchers in this range. So there's just, I think, an inherent variance. It's not bad. It's just adds a little bit more unpredictability to the ERA. And I think you can say the same thing about a couple of pitchers coming up on this
All
list.
right. Before we take our final break, reminder to subscribe to the FBT newsletter if you haven't already. cbssports.com/newsletters. You find the FBT logo, you click subscribe, and it's easy as that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can scan that QR code that will take you right to the website where you do exactly what I just said. It's free. It gets delivered to your email inbox, so why not? And heads up that we do have a bonus podcast coming out this week. I'll be joined by our buddy, the Welsh, Chris Welsh, to recap the Arizona Fall League, which ended this past weekend. So that will be out later on this week on Friday. So a little Kokomo Friday with the Welsh bonus podcast. Let's take our final break, and when we return, we'll hit some news and notes right after this.
If you love football, this is the best time of the year.
This is as big as it gets.
The stuff of absolute dreams.
Welcome back in. Let's hit the news and notes. Nick Martinez has accepted the $21 million qualifying offer and will return to the Reds. This past season, a 3.10 ERA, a 103 whip, well below a strikeout per inning, but out of nowhere became this amazing control pitcher. So we're hoping that can remain once again and hope that he will be in the rotation. I think that's pretty much a foregone conclusion if they're paying him this amount of money.
Right. You had to feel like they knew he'd probably accept it. That is well beyond what Nick Martinez's earning capacity has ever been. And I doubt they're going to pay $21 million for a swingman. So I think Nick Martinez, just seeing the number he got, deserves to move up the rankings. Not saying he needs to be drafted, shallow release. He might not be even drafted at all, but there's a lot more. There's going to be more interest in him in next year than there's ever been before,
And should be drafted in every head-to-head points leagues, which is the shallower format. But
yeah,
by dint of having RP eligibility, he gets a nice boost there in a year where, frankly, the Sparps are not good right now, at least.
Yeah, what is
where
it?
do I have him?
It's like Bowden Francis and Nick
Bowden
Martinez.
Francis, Nick Martinez, and then like Jackson Jobe, assuming he's in the rotation. Jeff Hoffman, Griffin Jax, if they transition to the rotation, but they're much more speculative, I think, than Martinez would be. And there was I just wrote about this today. I should have the names up closer to the top of my head. Drew Rasmussen, we expect to be in the rotation. That's the other one that I think those are the 6 of note.
85 is where I have Nick Martinez. I probably can get him as high as like 75 if I want to move him up at starting pitcher. I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
But if you say, well, that sounds low considering what you just said about him. Yeah, that's what starting pitcher looks like. Everybody seems too low.
Congrats on the rookies of the year. We mentioned Paul Skenes won in the National League, Luis Heel in the American League, and some consternation on the internet. There always is about Jackson Merrill versus Paul Skenes. I think both were worthy candidates. I probably would have voted for Jackson Merrill. I know in Fangraphs WAR, he was worth 1 win more. He also played more this season than Paul Skenes. So very, very close, razor thin decision, but
also
just both were deserving.
It's a shame that the NL had all the rookies.
Well, remember before the season, we were talking about what a complete dumpster fire the Padres outfield looked like, and it ended up being an actual strength for them. It would legitimately looked like one of the worst position groups in baseball for the Padres. And then Jackson Merrill and Jurickson Profile were like, nope, we're actually awesome in the outfield. We don't need any outfield help.
They both finished as like top 20 outfielders this past season. It was crazy stuff. Let's talk about those ballparks. The Rays will play in George M. Steinbrenner Field next season, the minor league home of the Single-A Tampa Tarpons. And this is due to the damages done to Tropicana Field suffered from Hurricane Milton. And there are lots of moving parts here. So Steinbrenner Field has the same exact dimensions as the current Yankee Stadium. So first thing that comes to mind, should be awesome for left-handed bats, right? So guys like Brandon Lau, Josh Lowe, Jonathan Aranda. On the flip side, I think this could be bad for Rays pitchers, right? Right-handed pitchers, maybe they're prone to more home runs allowed. Plus, Tropicana Field always graded out great for strikeouts because it was in a dome. They had that, batter's eye that kind of made hitters more susceptible to striking out. So, Scott, all around, this kind of feels like it could potentially be a boon for hitters and kind of bad for Rays pitchers.
Yeah, I'm most worried. I mean, maybe great news for Jonathan Aranda if he gets playing time, but I'm most worried about the pitchers here because we were going through it before we started recording. They have the right-handers, especially fly ball prone and home run prone. Taj Bradley got killed by home runs in the middle of the season, remember? And now he's going to a park that's going to play even better than Yankee Stadium for left-handed power hitters, we think. So that's pretty scary. Ryan Pepio, high fly ball rates. Shane Baz, fairly high fly ball rates. I think Shane McClanahan will be relatively fine as long as he looks fine coming back from a second Tommy John surgery. I don't think he'll be impacted so much by the environment, but a lot of that rotation will be, and I think they all deserve a downgrade based on this news.
Yeah. And I didn't even mention the weather, right? Like that's going to be a huge problem. We have summer months in Florida where it rains every single day. So it could lead to delays, maybe some postponements, and maybe even could mean some shorter starts for Rays pitchers as a result there as well.
The one thing I will say, and Scott, this having lived in Florida for a while, is the problem is not so much games being shortened by rain. Like the rain is usually gone by game time. It's those afternoons, like the 2 to 5 p.m. rain that causes delays. And this was the problem in Miami before they moved into Marlins Park, was the games it wouldn't be raining during the games all the time. It's just they couldn't play until the rain stops in the afternoon, and then the field dries and it's playable. And that's the bigger concern. I'm less concerned about like shortened starts or games being derailed.
Yeah. You don't get a lot of...
It's more of a concern in season for like 2-start pitchers. Like that is where it's like, oh, this guy's projected for a 2-start week. Well, it's the Rays, so they might just go with an opener one day and push everyone back. And also they might get 3 rain delays in a week if they play some home games. In
the summer, it basically rains every day. You don't get that all day rain so much unless it's a tropical event, but you get that daily showers, sometimes pretty heavy showers for a couple hours.
The bigger thing I think when you look at playing outdoors and in Florida is we only have one park to go off, right? Pro Player, Joe Robbie, Land Shark, Dolphins, Hard Rock, whatever you want to call it. It's had about 14 names in my lifetime. That was a really big stadium. Like the field dimensions were comparable to Coors Field. And that helped mitigate the fact that the ball flies further in warm weather and the ball flies further in humid air. And so that's a complicated confluence of factors that go into how far the ball flies. But the Marlins mitigated that by playing in a really big park. It was 425 to center field at Joe Robbie. It was like 390 to the power. It was super big. Steinbrenner Field is going to have relatively deep-ish power alleys and really shallow lines in a humid air in warm weather. I think this could play as one of the better parks for home runs in baseball. And then you add in the fact that Tropicana Field, Frank, I think you mentioned this already, typically played up at Tropicana Field. I've seen some discussions on it, but I haven't seen anybody like land exactly what it was. It's like a combination of playing at sea level in air conditioning, like whatever it was, and maybe the lighting at Tropicana. stuff just played up in a huge way at Tropicana Field. Strikeouts were much higher there than in neutral environments. And I think you're moving from a pretty positive pitching environment to one that seems like a clear negative to me. So I do think this, like Oakland, is a pretty dramatic park shift. And smarter people than me will be able to give more details on what exactly that means. But my expectation is that both Oakland and Tampa Bay will have pretty significant positive hitting park shifts in 2025.
And we might be saying the same thing for Camden Yards, because the Orioles are once again altering their ballpark, this time pulling the left field in closer to home plate. And they cited an overcorrection, and this will be their happier medium is what they're calling it. That left field wall will be pulled in varying distances between 9 and 20 feet. The height of the wall will no longer be 13 feet tall, rather 8 feet in some areas, and then 6 feet, 11 inches in others. So they're lowering the wall. They're pulling that wall in. I mean, off the top of the head, the hitters that this will benefit most, according to an article on MLB.com, Ryan Mountcastle lost 11 home runs over the past 3 years because of that cutout in left field. Adley Rutschman, despite being a switch hitter, lost 7 home runs, and then other right-handed power bats that could gain some here. Jordan Westberg, and we think Kobe Mayo is going to be an everyday player for the Orioles as well. So, Scott, that's good for those guys. And again, on the flip side, it could be bad for some of their pitchers.
Those numbers you cited, were they applying the new dimensions? They're saying Ryan Mountcastle lost 11 to those dimensions versus what they're changing it to, or
I don't think
just
they know,
based on what it was before.
I don't think they know exactly how far it's being pulled in at every point of the wall, because it's going to be varying,
inconsistent. Yeah. So here's the thing: the GM's describing it as a happy medium, but I don't think it's exactly medium. I think it's still going to be pretty pitcher friendly, because remember, they pushed him back 30 feet. It was insane.
Yeah.
And you look at the new dimensions, it's still at the foul pole 333. That's not changing. And it still immediately shoots way back to 373, which is a very deep, basically dead left field.
But it was like 395 before, right?
No, that actually hasn't changed.
Okay.
It's staying 373 for a good distance across now, when it used to go back even further from 373. But it still gets to that deep point very quickly. Yeah. And so I think it's still going to play toward – it's going to help. It's going to help hitters. It can't not help hitters. It's moving in some, but I don't think it's going to be so extreme that I'm moving Ryan Mountcastle up from he's 17 in my first base rankings currently. I'm not moving him into the top 12 based on this.
Yeah, no, I think it's, again, like you said, it's gonna help. I guess we don't know exactly how much yet, and I don't know. Maybe we don't need Ryan Mountcastle to be traded anymore, like we were potentially hoping for earlier on in the offseason, but. We shall see. Latest from the preheated oven, not the hot stove just yet. The Red Sox have expressed interest in Blake Snell. The Reds and Royals are discussing a swap of Jonathan India and Brady Singer, though nothing is close. And honestly,
that one, just I don't get it. I think that's just a bad trade on both ends.
Yeah, it feels like it would not help either hitter.
Yeah, Brady Singer in Cincinnati sounds like a disaster.
No. And Scott, your Braves apparently are interested in Walker Buehler, and this
makes a lot of sense.
Kind of what they do, right? They kind of take on some of these bounce back candidates, and for a lot of them, it's worked out. So, not that they've signed them yet, but they have interest in Walker Buehler. So, we'll see.
We'll see. I don't put a lot of stock in the rumors, but could be
over under $49.5 million. Walker Buehler's next contract. Where would you guys put it?
I'd put it under. I don't think the Braves will be interested if it's over.
Yeah, I think under as well. I think it probably depends how many years you think he's going to get.
I was thinking 250.
That seems like too much for me. I could see 240 maybe. Or if someone tacks on a 30, maybe he gets 350, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I would have to be a player option.
Yeah, maybe 2 for 40 in an option. Yeah, something like that. Walker Buehler, pretty interesting one. Showed out much better in the postseason. Hopefully that can carry over into 2025. So we only have 10 minutes left. I wanted to get through the top
speed run. Let's go.
Nope, we're gonna get through the top 12 for today. We have all off season, so we'll use Thursday's podcast as like 13 to 24, and then we'll kind of look at some early rankings for next week.
We can pace it better next time. I have confidence. We got bogged down in that Logan Gilbert Shota Imanaga pairing there. Yeah.
Really all we had to say was their Aaron Nola.
I hope you're right, Scott. The number 7 and 8 starting pitchers from this past season were Bryce Miller and Seth Lugo. Lugo does get a boost in head-to-head points leagues. He was the SP5 in that format, while Bryce Miller was the SP10 in points leagues. Miller became less reliant on his fastball. He introduced a knuckle curve on June 29th, and over his final 15 starts, he had a 1.94 ERA and a .91 whip. He also has massive home road splits, so we hope for fantasy that he is not traded away from Seattle. Again, that is Bryce Miller. And Seth Lugo had an awesome season, jack of all trades. He threw 9 different pitches this year. He's developed into a workhorse. Did take a pretty big step back in the second half, a 3.84 ERA after the break. So, Chris, how much do you buy what we saw from Bryce Miller, and what are your expectations for Seth Lugo next year?
I don't really buy what we saw from either of them, but I think the big question for Bryce Miller is, where is he pitching? If he's in Seattle, I think there's still a lot to like about him coming back. He had a 1.96 ERA and a 30.3% strikeout rate at home last season. He had a 2.45 FIP. Away from Safeco, it's not Safeco, T-Mobile. I'm really upset that the Astros are changing their ballpark name, by the way, because there's just Macan, whatever. There's none.
I think it's like Daikin. It's
I will get that in 2027, roughly. I will stop calling it Minute Maid Park by then.
I think an air conditioning company.
It's still Enron Field to me. Bryce Miller, 4.25 ERA, 18% strikeout rate, 4.88 FIP on the road last season. He was one of the biggest home road splits guys in recent memory, frankly, and not in a way that was like, oh yeah, but it's bad. But like his strikeout rate dropped 12%.
He's like a Rockies. He's like a Rockies hitter.
Yeah, that's wild. And so that's one where if he gets traded, and I feel like he's a pretty logical trade candidate for a lot of reasons, he could drop a long way in the rankings. Otherwise, I think he's solid. Like I don't really expect him to repeat what he did this season, but I do think a whip standout, a good ERA, and decent but not great strikeouts. That's probably where I am on Bryce Miller.
It's the whole Mariners pitching staff. He's just the next version of this. Probably closest comparison of them would be George Kirby, because it's still a fastball heavy arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of mixed in a bunch of secondaries that all came together to give him a secondary that allowed him to take this big leap. I only have him 32nd next year.
Yeah,
I'm kind of shocked he finished as high as he did. 32nd is still high. I have Zack Gallen 33rd, so it's still like a good range of the starting pitcher rankings, but it's not 7th.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lugo, I don't even have in the top 40 because
Lugo. I don't know. Like I have seen much smarter people than me suggest that the mere fact that Seth Lugo throws so many pitches and adjusts his arm angle, and like he throws 9 pitches, but will change his arm angle slightly to the point where like it might really be like 11 or 12 pitches functionally. That might enable him to just completely outrun his peripherals in a way that's sustainable. Like this is something that MLB teams are looking into, and I think we're seeing more deep arsenals. So it's possible. It just relies on him continuing to be a huge outlier in a way that I never feel comfortable projecting.
Well,
and so if I'm going to miss on Seth Lugo, I guess I'm going to miss on Seth Lugo.
So I was saying earlier that starting pitcher feels really deep, but it's not just guys who happen to perform well because it was a pitcher-friendly season. The talent looks like it's there. Seth Lugo seems like the pitcher who, if the environment changed, if the overall pitching environment changed, would go to potentially being just a fringe guy in fantasy. And for what it's worth, 2.48 ERA in the first half for Seth Lugo, 3.84 in the second half. So we
the
saw
highs
some regression.
were really high in the second half, and the lows were really low because
It
he
was
still
like-
had
It was like the
I
Mitch
think
Keller second half from
his
last
final
year.
14 starts. I think it was. He had 8 starts of at least 7 innings. I think it was bonkers. It was like he was either an ace or kind of useless in the second half. It was a weird stretch. I think something like the 3.84 ERA in the second half is what I'm expecting.
Yeah, and I think the underlying peripheral ERA indicators kind of line up with something like that for Seth Lugo as well. The number 9 and 10 starting pitchers, we had Corbin Burnes and Framber Valdez. Burnes was the SP6 in head-to-head points. Valdez did miss some time, but he was the SP7 in head-to-head points per game. So, yeah, two of the they get a little bit of a bump in that format. They just throw so many innings, both of these guys. Burnes, a free agent this offseason. He's become one of the faces of the game, frankly, but obviously just starting pitchers in general. He's a workhorse, but the strikeout skills, they have consistently been falling. He did talk about tweaking his cutter, and the strikeouts went up in September. How much do we trust something like that? And Framber Valdez, he remains consistent year in and year out. This year, we did see a new level of upside. He upped his curveball usage midseason, and over the final 14 starts, Framber Valdez had a 2.08 ERA, a .96 whip, 10 K per 9, and 12.7% swinging strike rate. So, Scott, how much do you worry about those strikeouts continuing to fall for Corbin Burnes? And do you think Framber Valdez has unlocked a new level?
I think Corbin Burnes completely redeemed himself in my mind in September. I totally buy the explanation he gave with the cutter. It went into a lot of details in an article in the Baltimore Banner. He had been throwing his cutter with too much spin. It didn't have the same movement on it. He didn't worry about it so much because he was having so much success with his breaking balls, but hitters eventually caught up to that. So he went to work on the cutter, saw the velo and spin go down, and he was a lot more effective overall. So I think Corbin Burnes is fine. I don't know if you disagree, Chris. You look like you wanted to jump in there.
I think the quote that I keep coming back to with Corbin Burnes when he explained his cutter, he had a really bad August, and he said his cutter was basically a bleepy four-seamer. Mm-hmm. More colorful language was his choice. But yeah, he's my number 4 SP. I know Jason Collette from RotoWire at First Pitch Arizona had a talk where he mentioned Corbin Burnes has thrown over 3,000 pitches 3 years in a row, and the track record for pitchers who have done that recently is very, very poor. They pretty much all get hurt. I don't know how to feel about that because over a long enough time span, all pitchers get hurt. And so if you tell me a pitcher hasn't gotten hurt in 3 years, I would say, yeah, he might get hurt in year 4. That sounds like he's due. But yeah, I also think all pitchers are due for injury. And it's just a question of when it happens. Will it happen in 2025 or 2026? I don't know. So I'm pretty much back in on Corbin Burnes as the top of the second tier at starting pitcher.
As for Framber Valdez, so did you give the numbers? The final 13 starts, 191 ERA, 0.89 whip, 10.3 K per 9. Clearly a different Framber Valdez, as good as he's already been over the years with that increased curveball use. I don't, as established as he is, as long as he's been doing this, I don't know that we can necessarily trust him to maintain that increased curveball usage. And in fact, it began to go down again over that 13 start stretch.
And as did the strikeout rate in September.
Yeah. I rank him 13th. So I think I'm on the more optimistic end in my approach to Framber Valdez for next year. But I'm not totally sanguine about it.
I think he is a totally fine if you take hitters in your first 4 picks or even 5 and you wind up with Valdez as your SP1 just waiting. I think it could be totally serviceable. If you look at what he's done over the past 3 seasons, it is a 3.06 ERA and a 1.13 whip with below a strikeout per inning. So, maybe you pair him with more upside guys that get whiffs and all that. But in terms of just an anchor that's going to give you a low 3s ERA, he's on a good team. He pitches innings. He's going to give you wins. I mean, he feels like one of the safer starting pitchers, if you can call a pitcher safe. But
solid SP1, phenomenal SP2. Like that's one where if you could manage to get him as your SP2, I kind of think you just don't think about starting pitching for like 10 rounds.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you just
Yeah, I get what you're saying. The way it breaks down for me at starting pitcher, and this is going to be kind of a separate conversation, I guess, and we don't need to go that deep into it today. But that range, I have Valdez, and I said I have him 13th. I've been saying 15 to 50.
mm-hmm.
You could almost rank them in any order. So Valdez is right in that group where if somebody had him ranked 23rd instead of 13th where I have him, I don't know that I'd really bat an eye at it. It's just a lot of what do you value most, personal taste, what risk factors concern you most, that sort of thing. And I think the risk for Valdez is pretty low.
Yes. That's what I mean when I say like take 2 starting pitchers in your first 6 or 7 picks and Valdez is your second. I don't know, whoever is your first. But like someone that like Corbin, Burns, and Framber, Valdez, that would be a really great just base to build a pitching staff around, where I don't take another pitcher until the end of that 50-ish range. And maybe I take 2 or 3 in the 40 to 50 range of the rankings to round out my staff in the 10th to 12th rounds. And I think I would feel really good about that as a way to build both a stable base and, I'm not taking Seth Lugo with one of those 10th to 12th round picks. It's those high strikeout, chasing potentially elite ratios with a lot of question marks. That's where I'm more comfortable doing that if I have, 2 guys at the top that I feel really good about. That's a build I really like for pitcher.
The number 11 starting pitcher was Dylan Cease, and number 12, according to the Fangraphs player rater, was Ronel Blanco. So Cease was SP8 in head-to-head points. Blanco, he ranks quite a bit lower in head-to-head points because he spent some time in the bullpen. He did miss some starts, but Cease's first season in San Diego was a success, a 3.47 ERA, 1.07 whip, massive strikeout numbers, the best walk rate of his career. Chris, you've said this many times. Cease feels like a pitcher you buy when he's coming off of a bad year. Maybe you fade when he's coming off of a good year like this, but he did make some improvements. And Blanco really kind of came out of nowhere. Huge breakout, 2.80 ERA, 1.09 whip, strong swinging strike rate, but also lots of walks. And each of his ERA indicators was 3.97 or higher. So not buying it and expecting lots of regression here. Chris, your thoughts on Dylan Cease as a borderline SP1 and just a huge breakout from Ronel Blanco.
Ronel, great story, incredible season. I think he's a streamer for 2025. I don't know, like back of rotation guy, fine. That's like your SP7 or 8, but I can't imagine chasing him.
So you have him that low? You have him like 75th?
Yeah, that's where I'm thinking. I haven't gotten that deep in it yet. I think I only did top 50 at starting pitcher.
I have him 50. I have him 55, which is not high. It's certainly not high compared to 12th where he just finished. But I do have him outside that top 50 I was referring to. That I think.
So
he could make an argument in being in the top 20.
Slightly above average strikeout rate, but not much.
8.9. Yeah, for as good as the swinging strike rate was, the strikeout rate, the K per 9 didn't live up to it.
Really poor walk rate. Yeah. Fastball get hit hard. Overall quality of contact is just kind of average-ish. And so, yeah, he looks like a 4 ERA pitcher without much strikeout upside to me. And he had 110 inning jump from last year, which the Astros were trying to limit as the season went on. So just I don't see upside. I see a lot of risk. It's just not a profile that I find myself wanting to chase very often. Now, Cease, you said buy off the bad years, sell off the good years. This feels like a pretty happy medium, though. Like, I feel like if you, I'm sure someone could do this. I don't have it in front of me, but I feel like if you averaged his previous 3 seasons since the 2021 mini breakout, he probably comes out to around a 3.50 ERA. I don't necessarily expect the walk rate to remain quite as good as it was last year, since we have a multi-year stretch of him being more like 10%. It was 8.5%, but you're talking about a percentage point one way or the other. So I don't think that really worries me. I think for all that Dylan Cease has been a source of controversy in fantasy baseball, I kind of think he just is what he is at this point. And what he is a really solid pitcher. I think probably a little too combustible to be an ace for your fantasy team. But this is a guy, another one where I don't know the last time Dylan Cease missed a start.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened at the major league level at any point, I don't think. He's made a full complement of starts going back to 2020. 2019, he made 29 starts between the majors and minors. 2018, he made 23. 2017, he made 22. Like, I don't think Dylan Cease, I don't know if Dylan Cease, someone can correct me in the comments or email if you want, but I don't know if Dylan Cease has missed a start for any reason in like 7 years. So maybe a slightly more volatile version of what we've talked about with Framber Valdez, where like, love that as my SP2. But I do feel like the ratios are a little more volatile with Dylan Cease, where anything from a 4.50 to a 2.50 ERA really would not surprise me.
Everybody's going to have Cease in the top 10, though.
I would think so.
I would assume. Yeah. So, yeah, I have 9th, and I don't really disagree with anything you're saying there.
He's 10th in the early ADP, just behind Jacob deGrom.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, he improved his walk rate this year. It wasn't a great walk rate, but it was improved. And if he can continue with that, there isn't a lot of reason for doubt. He was kind of the worst control pitcher in baseball, a guy who started as consistently as he did coming into this year. And came out of it not being that anymore. Nobody's doubting the strikeout potential for Dylan Cease. I think pitching in San Diego helps him, and I'm pretty cool with him. I don't know that I'm drafting any of my top 10 pitchers unless I get a huge discount for them, which probably isn't going to be Cease.
His ADP is 45 overall, which feels pretty reasonable when you look at like Chris Sale's 36. Certainly rather have Cease, 10 spots later, 12 spots later, whatever it is.
I would too. I still don't know that I'm going for a starting pitcher as early as 45, but I may just be weird in that way.
Cease, Reagans, and Crochet are kind of a mini tier in ADP right now. They're separated by about 3 picks. Who do you like best out of that?
Cease, Crochet, and who was the third?
Reagans.
I have him 7th, but here's the thing. Reagan 7, Cease 9, Garrett Crochet 10. You know who my number 8 is? Blake Snell.
Yeah,
that's the one that's gonna fall. That's the one that's gonna fall.
You're off the reservation on that.
You're gonna have a lot of Blake Snell.
I am.
We'll just pencil Blake Snell into your lineup every draft we do, because that's he's 24 for me, and I've seen even lower than that.
Yeah.
Not to be clear, not a critique of you ranking Blake Snell 8.
Yeah,
I just won't do it.
I mean, since it's come up, for me, we've done a lot of hand wringing over the years. Over this stretch, his numbers are really bad. Over this stretch, his numbers are really good. What it's all come out to over the last 3 years for Blake Snell is a 2.82 ERA, 1.16 WHIP, and 12 K per 9.
Talk to me.
That's a top 10 pitcher.
Talk to me in May. Scott.
Yeah.
When
And
Scott's-
also,
when
he's,
Scott's last in every pitching
he's thrown
category.
more than 134 innings twice in his whole entire
Yeah.
career.
That's
And he's been
that's-
around for like 4 presidential administrations.
I mean, you're putting Garrett Crochet ahead of him, so
Also,
Garrett Crochet last year threw more innings than Dylan Cease has in all but 2 of his major league seasons.
you mean Blake?
Blake Snell.
Blake Snell, whatever his name is.
All right, well, we do have to wrap it up here. Again, we got through 12 pitchers in 70 minutes worth of content here, so we'll try and pick it up next show. We are going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning into Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again on Thursday. Bye-bye.